Today, we're still going to be talking about these conversations we can have with investors, but we're going to go a bit before that, thinking about your target audience and understanding in both what's going on inside their head as well as the size of the audience that you can speak to. Before we do that, background about myself, I'm a consultant based here in New York City. I've been doing that independently for about 4 years. But before that, I worked at Facebook as an account manager, so helping clients like Warby Parker, BarkBox, Gilt monetize both paid Facebook and paid Instagram. And before that, I was at Adobe, also as a consultant, a search engine marketing consultant, helping clients monetize paid search marketing. So these days I stay busy by doing independent consulting, but I'm also the digital marketing expert in residence at Entrepreneur Magazine, and they also let me write there, so I'm a VIP contributor. And the fun part about that is I get to interview a lot of entrepreneurs just like you and learn their stories and share that with a larger audience, so it's a great opportunity. Last thing, I'm also a mentor at Techstars as well as the NYU Entrepreneur Institute. So that's me, that's my background. And I've done a lot of talks like this, which is great. But one thing I'm always aware of is sometimes you go to events like this, you learn a bunch of stuff, and like, that's cool, but I can't do anything with it. And this is one of my favorite quotes by Jim Rohn: knowledge uninvested in labor is wasted. So I'm going to talk about a lot of things today that you can actually do immediately without any kind of budget, without any kind of additional resources, because I want you to walk away with some tangible takeaways. So we're talking about understanding your target audience and defining it better. And I'm sure you've heard this before. A lot of entrepreneurs start a company by solving one of their own problems. And I'll give you a good example of that. This guy, Dr. Jason Weserland, he was a chiropractor who got in a really bad motorcycle accident and could not relieve his own pain. So he created this device to help him relieve this, which turned into the Theragun. Has anyone heard of the Theragun before? Yeah, it's awesome. It's like a muscle recovery device. Pretty much like a jackhammer that you can hold in your hand and, relieve some muscle pain. So he found this product that he invented for himself that worked for him, but then he had to figure out, hey, is there a large enough audience of people who want this thing, right? Are enough people looking for this kind of recovery that are willing to pay for it, because they cost about $400. They're not cheap, right? So just because you define a problem and you solve for it does not mean you have a large enough audience that will also want to purchase it. But the benefit for Dr. Jason is he was so close to the problem he was trying to solve because he had it too. So he had a deep understanding of his audience, which is vital to connecting with your audience. Another example here, Squarespace. Who here uses Squarespace for their website? Okay, a few of you. So Squarespace, it's a template for you to build a website. It's for people who want a good-looking website but don't want to use some kind of platform like WordPress, or maybe you're not even hiring someone to do it. So luckily, there's a lot of templates you can use. You can have a good-looking website. You can probably do it in a weekend, to be honest. It's pretty simple. And if you think about their target audience, it's going to be small businesses, entrepreneurs, freelancers, right? So if you looked at it from a demographic standpoint, maybe less than 5 million in revenue, 1 to 3 employees, so on and so forth. So those are demographics, cool, but that doesn't help you define an audience. You got to go much deeper than that. So instead of just a persona, we want to consider using what's called an empathy map. Raise your hand if you've heard of an empathy map before. Okay, so a few of you, about let's say like 20%. So an empathy map goes much deeper than a persona because you're crawling inside the head of your target audience and getting a much better understanding of who they are. What are they thinking? What are they saying? What are they doing? And when I say what are they doing, it's outside of just your product or services, what's going on in their life on a regular basis. And what are some pains and gains related to your product or service that you want to be aware of. Now, the reason why you want to go beyond just a persona is because these demographics from a persona will tell you, who's buying your product or service, but they won't tell you why. And if you can't figure out why someone's buying something, you can't find more people like them to make the same decision. So you want to go much deeper, and this is something that you normally see in UX or product innovation. I've been using it a lot for digital marketing and content marketing lately, so that's why I want to share this with you. But let's unpack this a little bit. So we're back at Squarespace. And I saw this post on Facebook when they first announced the fact that they had email marketing campaigns for Squarespace. Okay? Now, I was excited because right now I'm using MailChimp, right? So I'm using MailChimp to automate and send emails, and I was thinking to myself, well, shoot, if I can use Squarespace, that's gonna make things a lot easier. Because now I only have one login instead of two. Because I'm always forgetting my passwords, right? I forgot my password for LastPass. Don't do that, by the way, because then you're really in trouble. But I'm that guy who's always resetting the password, and they're like, well, you used that one before. I'm like, I'm running out of things to even remember that I forgot. So at this point, I'm like, cool, if Squarespace has an email platform that's comparable to MailChimp, I would strongly consider switching. This is a good example for us to start building this empathy map, and I'll show you how. We're going to use social listening. This is one of the most valuable practices you can do to have a better understanding of your audience, and the good news is it is free. So social listening is when, with intent, you're going on various digital platforms. It could be a website, it could be some kind of blog, it could be Twitter, it could be Reddit, so on and so forth, and you're mining all this information about your target audience based on the conversations that they're having, all right? And we're going to unpack this more momentarily, but this is going to be your secret weapon to crawling inside the head of your audience without spending any money. And we're going to start with Dee Dee. All right, so this is Dee Dee. And when she saw that post from Squarespace, she said, hey, can you create automated and drip campaigns? So whenever you're doing email marketing, let's say someone comes to your website, enters information, you want to do what's called a drip campaign or a lead nurturing campaign, where over the course of, let's say, 30 days, you send them information on a regular basis, right? She wants to automate this process for obvious reasons. Just from this one comment, though, we can start creating our empathy map. And I'll show you what I mean by that. What does she hear? That's what goes into this. That's one step. She hears, work smarter, not harder. What does she think and feel? I can't keep trading time for money. And I hear you there, Dee Dee. Same here. What does she say and do? She automates as much as possible. And what does she see? There's a ton of new apps, in the App Store that help with automation. So I'm looking at this comment, and I'm extrapolating to an extent, right? I'm like, what's going through her head? And you might say to yourself, Terry, that's one hell of a leap from one sentence to make this whole empathy map. And you'd be absolutely right. So you don't just stop here. You have to go deeper. So now I'm on Reddit. Who here uses Reddit? Great, a lot of you. So you're familiar with this, right? And I'm in the thread for entrepreneurs. Right? So you can go there, there's various communities, entrepreneurs, people who like knitting, new moms, so on and so forth. And if you look here, we have the top post here. It says, if you're not using automation, you're wasting your time and money. And it has 640 upvotes, meaning 640 people saw it and said this is good content, and there's 232 comments. So this is good validation for the fact that these entrepreneurs like Dee Dee value automation, right? What you're going to do now is start mining information. You're going to go through all of these comments, and you're going to see what they're saying about it. What have they tried before? What's working? What are some of their challenges, so on and so forth. And you're not going to see this one thing this one person said one time and put that in your empathy map. You're looking for clusters of themes that keep on coming up over and over and over again, and then from there, you would put that in your empathy map, right? So this is what I call the lonely work, because no one sees you doing this, right? It's not like a cool Instagram ad where you're like, hey, we just got some funding or whatever. You're doing this lonely work where you're just doing this deep research on your audience, and you're looking for the signal in the noise sometimes, right? So I suggest doing it on your headphones while you're doing this, but this is the grunt work that a lot of people don't want to do. So if you're doing this and it feels hard, good, because a lot of people are going to quit. And this is going to be your advantage to having a better understanding of your audience. And sure, you're going to create better content to connect with them, but you might discover things that you weren't even aware of about what they're looking for in your product, your service, or your solution, and augment it based on the information. So it's worth this effort, this grunt work. And here's an example of what this empathy map could look like for an entrepreneur. This might hit home for some of you, so if you get triggered, I hear you. But the first thing you're saying is, I can't keep on trading time for money. What's the best way to scale? Going to, what are they seeing? An inbox full of common questions. They're wearing a lot of hats. They work out when they can, but how do you find the time? What are they hearing? Positive feedback from customers. They listen to the MFCEO podcast. Anybody else listen to that? It's pretty good. So in regards to this product, this email, what are some of their pains and gains? A pain is challenges around onboarding new systems. you will put up with discomfort with a platform that's existing rather than learn how to use a new one that might be better sometimes. I've been there several times, right? You're like, look, I know this one's not perfect, but at least I know how to use it. So I was going to go with that. I'll take a solid C+ any day if it just keeps me going instead of learning something new. Will be a gain having one login for multiple use cases, right? So these are things that we're pulling out of our audience by doing this social listening. It goes in our empathy map, and wow, now we're empowered more to make this genuine connection with our audience and learn more about what's going on in their head. So when you're talking to these potential investors or business partners, you know all this stuff. You're like, here's why we're doing this, because they keep on saying that. This same theme keeps on coming up that I discovered through this audience research that I've done. So then you take this information and you can apply it to your content marketing, or even just like a simple description of your company, right? So one thing we're saying is, time is money. You say, hey, we know your time is valuable. That's why we help you automate the process of sending these emails, right? Another one, we wear many hats. I'm sure you can all relate to this. You started a business and somehow you became an accidental marketer in the process. Our integrated products are simple to use, yet provide valuable results. So you're taking everything you're learning from your empathy map, and you're also using that to create content to make a more genuine connection with your audience, right? So you don't have to be a content writer to know these things. You're more or less paraphrasing their problem or their challenges and repeating that back to them. That's why this is your secret weapon to creating better products and making that connection. So how do you build the empathy map? Well, the most accessible way, I don't want to say easiest, is going to be social listening. That's the process we just went through. And for me, whenever I'm talking about processes, I like to present things that are easy to understand, but difficult to execute, but where the difficulty comes from mastery. And that mastery can be achieved by grit, by curiosity, by hard work, by pushing through when everyone else wants to quit. So that's why I like this approach. You can do surveys and focus groups. That's going to cost you money and time, especially depending on what you're offering. Because I always wonder, well, who has time to come in for a focus group? Is that your target audience? Maybe, maybe not, but it seems like they just want a free gift card. I don't know. And then surveys, same thing. Is it actually the person who, are they actually representing themselves properly, so on and so forth. If you already are active, your sales or your customer support team is a great source of information for this. Because when they're trying to sell in, the feedback they're getting is, well, I want to use this product, but here's the use case. Or one challenge I have with my current incumbent is this. So if they're actively listening instead of waiting to pitch, they can also take this information and pass it back to you. Same thing with your customer service team. Well, the reason why I'm upset is because I wanted to do this, and it's doing that instead. So you want to do this cross-departmental communication when you're building your empathy map, and not just silo it to one department or another. All right, so it's all hands on deck. You would do a whiteboard session where you just start writing things, no judgment. Let's just kind of get this all down, and that's how you're going to build it. And then lastly, in-person events. Just paying attention to what's going on around you when your target audience is around. And that's why I said you have to listen with intent, because sometimes when we're listening, we're just waiting for our turn to talk, right? And I'm guilty as charged, right? It happens all the time. But if you're just like this fly on the wall, just saying, okay, what are some common questions that keep on coming up, some common concerns, you can do this research in person just by being present and in the moment, as opposed to thinking about other outcomes. So that's the process. Here's your homework. Spend 10 hours doing this. And I know that sounds like a lot. Good, because you're going to learn a lot, and I think after a while, your own curiosity is going to fuel you going forward. Like, wow, I never discovered anything about this approach before, and now I feel like just so much more empowered to better communicate, to understand my audience, and literally you're doing it, right from your desktop should you choose to. I'm going to pause because I see some questions. Let me go ahead.
Social listening, it's super manual, right? Like if you're going to your competitors or looking up hashtags, are there any social listening tools that are free that you would recommend, other than like the Radian6s of the world and like Global Web Index, which charges a ton?
Yeah, so the question is, are there free social listening tools that you can use? Not super great ones, the best way for me to say it. Because there is a lot of value associated with it. I think you can use some cheaper ones that maybe like a Hootsuite to an extent, where you're just like monitoring for keywords that are being messaged. But yeah, like when you want like actual data around it, like this, that's kind of spelled out more, you're looking at a Radiant 6 or an Adobe Social, and there's a cost associated with that. So what I always like to say is whenever you're using some kind of marketing technology, you shouldn't start there, right? You should start with what you can do for free and keep it simple. And then as you gain this insight, you're like, well, if we just do this much more, we could do better. So graduate to that. But I'm sure you all like have a friend, like every time they start a new hobby, they buy all the most expensive stuff. I'm like, dude, you still don't know how to ski. Like that's not helping. Like you don't want to be that person either as a business owner. But you bring up a good point, just monitoring hashtags, because Twitter is a great place for you to do social listening, right? Because you're going to have these relevant hashtags for your target audience. You're going to go there where people tweet about it. You can take a look at it. You can set up alerts for that. Even doing Google alerts, which I know is kind of old school, but you can set up a Google alert where you'll get an email when certain terms are mentioned as well. So you're at least automating that research process and then still manually digesting it. So that's the approach I would take. Other questions as we're pausing? All right. Cool. Who here's heard of WAG before? It's this dog walking service. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So WAG is this on-demand dog walking service. You just push a button once you sign up, and they will send a dog walker to your home or apartment. Right? So you're working late, you're trying to get some work done, and you're like, oh, I have not walked my dog yet. You push a button, you can relieve that anxiety by having someone who's vetted go to your home or your apartment and walk your dog, okay? For as little as $20 a month. I want to use this as an example of how we can start talking about your addressable market, okay? So your addressable market versus your non-addressable market. If you look at the total US households that have dogs, it's 51 million people, 51 million households. You do not want to say, hey, we have this great new app called WAG, and it's going to be revolutionize the way people walk their dogs. There's 51 million people in the US, or 51 million households in the US. If we reach just 1% of them, we're going to make $1 billion. That's how you get laughed off of Shark Tank before like the first commercial break. So you don't want to just say like how many people or how many households have dogs. That's not your addressable market. You want to go deeper than this, and the question came up earlier, yes, there are ways to do this in a paid fashion. I'll walk through that as well. But again, my goal here is to give you insights and tips that you can implement when you walk out of here, right? No cost. But first we have to walk through a few acronyms here, TAM, SAM, and SOM, all right? So TAM is your total addressable market, all right? That's everyone, the entire market, of this case of dog owners, regardless of your ability to reach them or not, all right? So in this case, every dog owner in the US. Then there's your SAM, your serviceable addressable market. And this is what portion of that audience would actually want your product or service. Because some people love walking their dog. They're like, no, that's my thing. Like I wake up in the morning, I walk my dog, it's a form of least relaxing. It doesn't matter how cheap this is, I don't want it. That's how I get my energy, that's how I get my exercise. I love it, right? So they don't want it no matter what. Then there's your serviceable, obtainable market. This is what proportion of the audience that would want your product or service that you can actually reach. This is extremely important because in your initial conversations with investors, that's what you focus on. What is my obtainable market? But the key thing here is what percent you can actually reach through various channels. So you have to have a plan how you would reach them. Right? If we reach them on Facebook, or we reach them on Instagram, this many searches, so on and so forth. There has to be a plan behind this because that then backs into a marketing budget. How are you going to reach these people, right? Now, most investors are going to say, okay, cool, we got this, that's your obtainable market. And if you meet that goal, you hit a certain number from that market, cool. That's a great impression to make. You prove that you have a viable service and you know how to reach your audience through whatever channel you choose. And they would say, cool, now how can we help you reach your SAM? That's the next goal. So sure, not everyone necessarily, needs this dog walker, but maybe they're going on vacation, or maybe on the last minute we want to make them aware of it. We can grow this pie even bigger through these networks, through other associations. And then lastly, the total addressable market It's there, but it's like, like it's going to be tough to actually hit that market. But again, you do want to be aware of what that size is. So you're really playing down here first, the serviceable, obtainable market, and you got to be honest what this is, right? You don't start out with a 51 million or just any kind of weird math on it. That's a horrible first impression to make on people, and that's what people get called out on all the time on Shark Tank. You see it all the time, right? So we'll go deeper into how we can determine how many people we can reach on various channels momentarily. But like I was saying before, there are other platforms like Forrester or Gartner you can use to determine the size of these markets too. But a Forrester report's going to cost between 30 and 65K. Gartner can be a little cheaper, maybe 30K. And as a beginning startup, that's a lot of money, right? It's a lot of money no matter what. So you don't necessarily want to tie up that much capital in research initially. Sure, down the road, go for it. But what I want to do is give you some ways where you can determine the size of this audience without putting that much money into it initially. A few ways. One is using the Google Keyword Planner. So anyone here who's ever used Google AdWords, I'm sure you've used this keyword planner before. More or less what you're going to do is put some keywords in. These guys have used it before. You're going to put some keywords in, and it's going to tell you the search volume related to that term, as well as how much you would have to bid in order to show up on the top of the page for Google, on the SERP we call it, the search and the results page. And you can also use Facebook Ads Manager, right? So you can use this targeting on Facebook to see what is your addressable market based on whatever criteria you put in. Maybe it's people who like biking or dogs or whatever. But let me unpack this a bit further. So Google Keyword Planner, cool thing is this is free. You never have to run a single ad to use Google Keyword Planner, right? So that's obviously their goal, but you don't have to do it. And you're going to use this option for getting an idea of your search volume and forecast. Forecast part's very important in this case. And you'll see here I put in two terms, all right? The first term is dog walker. And you see there's about 50,000 average monthly searches for that term, which is a healthy number. And if we wanted to rank on the top of the first page when someone's searching for it, we would pay about $2 per click. That's what they're saying on the low end you would have to bid to show up for the term dog walker. Is that global? So that's a good question. The question was, is it global? The answer is, it depends. You can make it local if you want. You can make it local to New York City. And that's very important because when you're talking about your serviceable, obtainable market, if you're just starting out, you're like, look, we're just going to be in all the major cities like New York, Miami, so on and so forth. That's what the audience is. And that's what a lot of investors would ask too. So great question. So the next one, I got more granular. I said dog walking app. These are the people who are looking specifically for a dog walking app. Like that's your bread and butter right there. These are the hand raisers who are just already get this. And you want to suspect there's going to be an overlap between dog walker and dog walker app, by the way, right? Because the same person can enter both these terms. But when I'm talking about my obtainable market, if I want to play it safe, I'm going to say about 18,000. Because, and I would say, hey, look, by the way, we're seeing this many searches for, dog walker, but for someone who wants this exact technology, there's at least 18,000 people a month that are searching for this. So again, you sound so much more logical, to be honest, when you present it that way instead of saying 51 million, right? Because that's not a good look. That's not a good impression to make. Now, we can also get some other information about our audience by looking at this, because if you look at the data at the top, this is trend data, we see when these searches are occurring, and you see it peaks in January, right? There's more peaks in January for people looking for dog walkers or dog walker apps. I don't know, maybe you get them for Christmas or something, or maybe it's like New Year, new dog walker, I don't know, but that's what I'm seeing in this data. So now when I'm talking to my investors, I sound even more educated. I'm like, the peak season for this is going to be in January. We really got to hit it hard. So spend Q4 getting ready for this. Then in January, when all these searches come, bam, we're ready for it, So just by this, you sound so much more educated on the behavior of your audience. If you look even closer, you look at total searches in blue, mobile are in red, right? So we see that the majority of these searches are on mobile in most cases here. So another thing you would say is we got to make sure we got a good mobile site, right? Because sure, maybe I'm not going to initially book a dog walker, sign up for a dog walking service on my phone. I'd want to kind of do some research on this first. Like, do you vet people before they come to my home? But we do know that people are doing this search initially on their phone, their mobile phone, so we want to make it really easy for them to learn more about our product or service on their mobile phone. I want to stop here for a moment and do a quick math lesson because this is also a good way for us to back into budgeting again, all right? So we're going to go with that $2 per click on the low end for the bid you'd have to show up when someone Googles the term dog walker. If I have $200 and I'm paying $2 per click, how many clicks can I afford? $100, there you go. 200 divided by 2 is 100, congrats. So if I got 100 clicks to my website and my conversion rate is 10%, how many conversions do I get? 10, you guys are killing it. Yeah, so if I get 10 conversions and it costs $20 a walk, how much revenue did I make? $200, so we broke even in that case. Right? So again, like we're getting into forecasting to an extent, like, hey, with this budget, I can get you this. And if they get another walk, that's when we start making profit. So when you're going through this, you could even see, well, what keywords can I bid on versus which ones I can't bid on based on the price for them. Let me stop here, because I know we got Matthew real quick, and just field any questions that came up with this walkthrough. Hi, go ahead. And actually, I think we're going to run a mic over to you.
So my question is, there are certain, I guess, keywords that you can't look up through like Facebook Ad Manager, which is one of the places you showed up. And like, for example, it's like CBD, because they don't allow you to advertise CBD products. So how would you find out the target audience sizes for those type of things, which you can't really, that don't really show up in places like Facebook Ad Manager? Yeah,
so the question is, if I'm trying to use Facebook ads, which we'll get to in a moment, and I'm looking up terms like CBD, you can't necessarily, that's not necessarily a target audience. How can I determine that? What I normally would say is look for indicators that someone might be interested in CBD. So what other products are they using? Maybe it's like special crystals or something. I'm making this up. But you want to look for the behavior, not the exact action sometimes. So what magazines are they reading? Are they following certain people on social media who talk about it a lot? You would have to use that as a proxy for the exact term CBD in that case. So that would be my thought on that. Cool. Other questions?
I think my question is that you're talking about more a B2C market. What about a B2B market, like business to business? How do you do all these kind of finding the social listening?
Yeah, so the question is, what if you're B2B? It's the same approach, because people are still looking for enterprise-level software on Google, and those same search terms would come up. So you can use it for anything in that case. Other questions? We got one back here.
B2B audience, LinkedIn might work. I don't know if you have familiarity with that.
Can you use the same approach for LinkedIn? To an extent, if you're doing the LinkedIn like ad platform, because you can see I'm targeting people who like enterprise software or whatever, and then see what the projected addressable market would be. Yeah, you could. So going on to social now, yeah, you can do the same thing. Well, you can take a similar approach with Facebook, or in your case, LinkedIn. And right now we're in Ads Manager. We're at the ad set stage for those of you who have done Facebook ads before. And I'm putting in the initial interest of dog walking. But let's take a step back. How do you get identified as someone who is into dog walking? It's based on a few things. It's based on your behavior off of Facebook by going to websites where they're talking about walking dogs. Due to the Facebook pixel, which a lot of you I'm sure have heard of, it's a form of tracking visitors and conversions that occur on your website that come from Facebook or Instagram. But the thing is, you can just like go to one blog that casually talks about dog walking, and all of a sudden you're like in this target audience for dog walking, which is why I'm saying people that have showed an interest in dog walking and have done these other things. They've looked for like a dog bather, dog sitter, dog food, dog grooming. I'm more or less hedging my audience to make sure that it's not too big just by someone somewhat, accidentally getting put in this target audience for dog walking, right? And in this case, we have about 1.9 million people that have expressed an interest in dog walking and all these other attributes. So back to your original question about people who are like into CBD, maybe we'd want to stack a few other things, like they read like How High and like all this other stuff, But That's the approach I would take. And again, you don't have to actually run an ad for this whatsoever, right? You can just do this understanding, this forecasting, and if you put in your budget, how much you will be willing to pay, you can actually forecast how many people roughly you can reach per day with that same budget. So we're covering it from two angles, both search and and social. Yeah, there's a question somewhere. Yeah.
But on the other side, you had 18,000 people looking every month. So in a span of a year, that's 200,000 people.
Yeah.
So if you're like, well, in a year I can grab 200,000 of them versus 1.9, I mean, it's a big difference between these two. I mean, I understand there are more people interested than typically go to Google search. So how do you really balance between the two?
Yeah, and that's somewhat addressed on this one. The Google data tells you people who are actively searching for your product or service. That's great, and I prefer that if I want to be very specific on what I think the market is. Facebook tells you people who have indirectly expressed an interest. So when I think about my SOM, I'm going to focus more on Google data because I feel more comfortable with that, as opposed to saying, well, there's someone out there who might be interested if we show them this, and they actually stop scrolling on Instagram or Facebook long enough to click. That's not the conversation I want to have with an investor. I want to say there are hand raisers out there, and that's why I want to target. When we're talking about our SAM, though, then this data comes in handy more. So yeah, great question. Other questions? That was a really good one. In terms of cost, it costs more to reach people that are searching for something than to get your ad in front of people who are indirectly expressing this interest. So your CPM, your cost for 1,000 ad impressions, would be higher for Google than it would for Facebook or for LinkedIn or other social channels. So you want to consider that as well. Okay, so we just got done talking about how we're defining the size of our audience, doing some research on them as well. And there's just a few more data points we got to push through here to make sure that we have make sure we're able to have an intelligent conversation with any business partner, any investor, so on and so forth. Your CAC, your cost to acquire a customer. You absolutely need to know this, and just keep it simple. It's more or less the amount that you spent divided by the number of customers acquired, right? So simple math on it. It gets a little fuzzy though when you start using influencers and obviously with word of mouth. But as close as possible, you want to get a good understanding of exactly how much money you spent, divided by how many customers you got. And that's why having this data from a Facebook or from a Google Ads is beneficial. So that's when you get into this whole multi-touch attribution model. Like, did they Google it, and then you retargeted them, and then they saw an ad on Facebook? So the closest you can get to understanding what that whole journey looks like, the more solid you have an understanding of your cost to acquire a customer. So just be aware that it's going to be fuzzy math to an extent. And here's another thing. In the beginning, it can be somewhat low because some people just get it. They're like, oh, cool, I really want this dog walking app. This is awesome. Boom, I'm good to go. So your conversion rate will be much higher. And since you have a higher conversion rate, that lowers your cost per conversion or lowers your CAC. So be aware of that because these early adopters, these initiators, they're like this buying stuff. Like, people who as soon as the new iPhone comes out, they're standing in lines like, yeah, take my $1,000. Those people, right? As soon as it comes out, they want it. So look out for those false positives because within the first 30 to 60, maybe 90 days, you're like, oh, we're killing it. And you go out with that number as your CAC, it can change. I've seen it happen several times, actually. And then beyond that, if you're using a platform like Facebook or any kind of paid social or even paid search, algorithms are geared to show your content to people who are more likely to convert. That's the way they work. That's why it's an algorithm. So they're showing it to the most likely people first. You're converting at a higher rate. And as a result of that, your cost to acquire a customer goes down. So if you start tooting your own horn because you're like, hey, we're killing it with these 30 to 60, these 30 to 60 days, you can be in a little bit of trouble. So you want to wait for it to normalize to an extent. So again, like 90 days would be a good fit for most audiences. Also, not all audiences are created equal. And that means they might not provide as much value in the long run. Right, so you want to be aware of that. So for me, every time I buy something online, it's normally on sale. So I'm cheap, right? So if you acquire me once, the average, we're going to call the customer lifetime value is going to be pretty low for me. And that's the next thing you have to understand is what's your CLV, your customer lifetime value. And again, simplified, that's going to be your annual revenue per customer times the years that they're a customer divided by your customer acquisition cost. So I'm sure you've all heard this before, and it does make sense. A few things to reach out is it can be challenging to assess especially when you're new, because you need data. You're like, dude, I don't know, like, people renew our product every year. Am I supposed to wait a year to have like good data on this? Like, what are you talking about? And you also might have outliers that skew the data. People that like have a really high, value or revenue that they're bringing in for one reason or another, very low. So CLV, it's used still, but it's more beneficial for like a traditional company, or sorry, a company that's like been around for a while, as opposed to a startup, because you don't have this data initially. Which is why you might want to use predictive CLV. And predictive CLV is still using data, but it's inferring, okay, based on your behavior, it looks like you're likely to be a customer for this long. People who usually buy subscription services, they stay on for like 6 months, but wow, you're on the website like every day reading our blog, you open all our emails. Based on our data, and now we're talking about machine learning, right? Based on our data, it looks like you're gonna be a customer for a long time. And the way that you do that is you look at your churn. People that did, in this case, unsubscribe, what were their behaviors like in the months and weeks leading up to it? Oh, they barely opened the app, and they had like a low customer, a low rating for their dog walker, so on and so forth. You're saying, okay, it looks like they're not gonna be a good fit. Or people that we got from social, you know what? Usually they have a lower CLV than people that came from search, because they weren't looking for our product or service. We just presented this to them, and they're like, yeah, sure, impulse buy, here you go. So you can actually segment your audience by acquisition source and say, look, they could have a higher or lower CLV, right? So anyone who comes in maybe on terms they're looking for a deal, like cheap dog walking service instead of reputable dog walking service. Cheap dog walking service, they'll leave you for a cheaper one, right? That's what they're looking for. But someone's looking for high quality, that's their main concern. So that's when it gets really interesting, because you can look at actual keywords and then from there, do some more predictive analytics around that. So as you can imagine, a high CAC to CLV ratio can lead to the early demise, right? If it's costing you a lot of money to get a customer and they have a very low CLV, that's not good. So staying with the whole theme of dogs, I used to consult BarkBox when I was at Facebook. Anybody heard of BarkBox? A lot of dog lovers here. So BarkBox is a subscription service where every month you get dog treats and dog toys sent to your home or apartment for your dog. And I'm gonna make up numbers, so not to give away their data, but just to give you an idea. The cost per acquisition was about $90 to get someone to sign up for BarkBox, okay? So since it was only $30 a month, we had to keep them on the books for at least 3 months before we became profitable. And we realized certain audiences were less likely to stay on the books than others. And in looking at the data, this is a geographic thing, we saw people from larger cities, metro areas, were less likely to stay on the platform than people that were in more rural and suburban areas. Now, if you think about this, those of you who have dogs, it kind of makes sense, because every month you're getting dog toys and dog treats, and if you have a 2-bedroom apartment in Crown Heights, you're tripping over dog toys after a while, you're like, dude, stop, I'm good. So what we started doing is we started geo-targeting more urban and suburban areas, and we also discovered they are more likely to have more than one dog who is like sharing the toys and the treats, right? So again, you want to figure out ways to target people who are going to have a longer CLV, and sometimes it's the keyword they came in, sometimes it's where they live, but that's the goal, is to make sure you keep on getting revenue back from these people over and over again. Just throwing a number out at you, a 3-to-1 ratio CLV to CAC is ideal, because just making money and breaking even is not enough. You have to pay everyone's salary, you got to keep the lights on, you got to pay for your logo, whatever. So this is more for like a software in this case. But if you have like around a 3-to-1 ratio of your CLV to CAC, you're in a healthy state, and that's what investors are looking at. Like, what's your ratio of your CLV to your CAC? And that's why you got to know these numbers, when you're going into these meetings. Even if it's, not exact, you have to have an idea, more or less, what that looks like. So let me give you a real example. This is a brand that I work with. It's called Bear Power Foods. So it's the world's most powerful shake. It's keto-friendly, high in protein, has these healthy fats. And I'm an advisor with this company. I've been working with them for a couple of years. And one thing that we realized is we could predict the CLV based on the ads people responded to, as well as the keywords that they responded to on paid search. So people that were looking for diet, keywords like that, sure, they would buy this, because like, oh, cool, it's gonna be a good way for me to lose weight. But other people that were looking for keto-friendly shakes, that was the bread and butter, because those people had lifestyles that were based on being keto friendly, not just someone looking for a diet. Because someone looking for a diet, they're like, oh, I took your shake and I didn't lose any weight. It's like, well, you got to work out too. Like, that's not how it works. But someone who already knew that they wanted to be, using this keto friendly shake, they were more likely to be like these long-term customers. So a fascinating thing that we found just like by looking at the keywords and even the ads they responded to, right? If we talked about how it incorporates into your lifestyle and how it saves you time, those people stay in the books longer than us just talking about the benefits from a health perspective, potentially losing weight. So talked about a lot of data, talked about doing some research, but you also might be thinking, well, Terry, look, that all sounds cool, but I'm busy. I'm also running this company. So there are going to be times when you want to bring in additional resources. I fully support that, because you're an expert at creating products or services that solve problems. And when you start trying to become a digital marketer or this researcher, you're kind of diluting your time and maybe not necessarily, I don't want to say doing the best job, but you might not necessarily be the best person to do it. I see it happen all the time. Companies come to me, they're like, hey, I'm doing this stuff, and this guy wants me to give him all this money. Can I just do it myself? Can you teach me? And I'm like, it's going to cost you a lot more, perhaps, to take that time away from your core competency. You might as well just outsource that. But when you are bringing in these additional resources, you have to have a defined outcome. So we already know who our target audience is. Here's this empathy map I created that's going to say, wow, this person put in a lot of deep work, right? I can't just give them this template that I give to every company and say, oh yeah, it's going to be amazing, we got your back. So even if you're not an expert, the more prepared you are with these conversations, the better treatment you'll get. I see it happen all the time from agencies, from other companies. The more prepared you are, the less likely you are to have that junior person working on your product or on your account. And then ask for referrals too, right? You right now are in this a great room to ask for referrals. You're among your peers. And when you ask for referrals, you want to find someone who's worked in that line of business or that industry before too, because being really good at software as a service does not necessarily equate to being really good at understanding fashion. So pre-qualify even how you're getting a referral. Okay, well, what has she done before, this industry or that industry? And just ask plenty of questions, right? The more questions you get, first of all, you should be able to get closer to who you want to narrow in on. But even the way people will respond to questions, if you can tell they're just trying to get off the phone or get through the conversation, that gut feeling, you want to stick with that and decide to pass. But what I also want to do is equip you to know what questions you should ask someone. So I have this document. You're all going to get a link to it. It's 40 questions to ask a freelancer or an agency before you actually hire them. So you don't have to know what the responses should be, because I put the answers down they should give you as well. So just asking these questions, these probing questions, again, you're presenting yourself as someone who's in the know and is just looking for a partner to help extend your ability to achieve whatever your desired outcome is. So you'll get this PDF. It's going to be your little cheat sheet to use when you're on the phone, or just have it on your phone during these meetings. But I just want to give you something to empower you to actually ask these questions. So when you're communicating with investors, coming near the end here, have all your data ready and memorized. And I know it's tough because you're you're going there, you're nervous, you're wondering if your tie's crooked or not. But if you don't have this data ready, I'll get back to you, they might not get back to you, first of all. So that's not a good look. And it just shows that you don't really have a mastery of this. You don't know what your CLV is, you don't know what your CAC is. That's not good. You should have this dashboard in your head that's always up to date. And don't grossly over-exaggerate your market size, and be honest about the variability in KPIs. Hey, right now we're seeing it come in really good in January, but we also know January is when there's a lot of search volume for this. We suspect it's because a lot of people get dogs for Christmas or during the holidays. So I just want to be honest and upfront about that. This might change with the seasons. And then do storytelling around your data, because first of all, you'll seem less boring. If you just start vomiting out numbers, it's next, no one wants to hear that. So if you do some kind of storytelling to put context around your data, that helps a lot too. So since we convert these dog owners, how do we keep them happy? Well, here's what we do. We're talking about CLV here, but again, you have this storytelling behind it that frames it and puts more context to it, which just makes it less boring for everybody who's listening to the presentation. All right, so these are my tips here. But that is all I want to talk about. We do have about 10 minutes for Q&A, so I'd love to do that. But just thank you in advance for your time and your attention. And, thanks. Appreciate that. And now I can go ahead and answer some questions. Hi.
When we were on the Facebook slide, while we were trying to figure out what the obtainable market was, you were like, let's make it really realistic and put in the various criteria. But then on the flip side, when you're going about kind of thinking about running your first ad campaigns on Facebook, is it better to keep that broader, obviously within reason, versus kind of narrowing it down too far initially, the way that you would go about figuring out your obtainable market?
So the question is, if you're running an ad on Facebook, does it make more sense to go broad initially as opposed to having a very small market to figure out who's going to bite? I would say if you're trying to determine if a certain niche is going to be responsive, if you have north of, let's say, a couple million people in it, that's big enough, right? If it's only like 40,000, that's not enough data to really matter. But if you have a couple million, I'd say that's a good size to start with. The downside of going really broad is like you don't know what attribute stuck. Was it they like dogs? Was it they like walking? Was it like they like apps? So you can't see the signal through the noise. So it's beneficial to have that really small audience. Now, what you can also do is do a series of tests because, not to get too technical, but like now with Facebook, I think starting this month, there's what's called, it's like this campaign optimization where all your different ad sets, it's going to automatically put budget towards whichever targeting option you're using that works best. So now you can just leave it like that and it'll automatically select which is working best for you anyways. Got another one over here.
So when it comes to like all these different entry channels and customer segmentations, right? Where does like split testing come into play? Like for example, with the bear, right? If you have somebody who's coming in on a diet and then somebody else who's actually a keto person in general, like how do you play in that realm?
If we're talking about search, what you would do is one keyword is diet, the other one's going to be keto. You put $50 towards both of them, and you let the ads run, and then you wait till you reach statistical significance in the data, meaning we have enough data to say one's working better than another. That's always going to be a function of data, which is going to be a function of time, but you want to make sure you reach that, it's hard for me to say, statistical significance before necessarily pulling the trigger and say one's working better than another. If you're doing it on a platform, not to keep on talking about Facebook, on Facebook, it's pretty easy to do. There's a button you hit to say you want to do a split test. One audience is only one audience is going to be keto, the other one's going to be diet. And once you're in the diet audience, you would never be included in the keto audience. So that way there's no overlap. And it will automatically tell you once you've reached that significance in your data.
And thank you. One follow-up too. Would you consider trying to maybe change the product or the maybe pricing schemes depending on the kind of customer you're dealing with?
I would, because what you might find is people like your product or service, but like it's too expensive. So yeah, that's a good idea. And actually even thinking about Bear, the product that I showed you, through social listening, we discovered that some people had a challenge with the fact that we're using single-use bottles to package the product, right? They're saying, hey, we like this, but it's, it seems like we're wasting bottles here. So going back to that empathy map, sure, we knew they were keto and they liked being healthy, but they were also environmentally conscious, because a lot of people live in like California, where they're more cautious than some other areas. So we're actually making a change now, where first of all, the plastic that's going to be used it's much easier to recycle, and second of all, we're going to have bins you can scoop out too. So, and you should be doing that. Like that's design thinking, right? You do this testing and then you iterate and you change. If you're so rigid, you're like, no, like it's not just for you. It's like, no, dude, there's a lot of people saying like this stuff, and you should use that input because it's valuable. So absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep. Hey. Oh, sorry, go here first.
Let's say that I have started a company, I've captured my initial market, and I want to hire somebody to help me, expand. You mentioned I've asked for proofs of performance, but I don't know anything about that. So when you're looking to hear these answers, are there any like red flags that you would be looking out for, or like any sure sign ways that, okay, this person is good or not? Like what's the simplest like route to evaluate somebody who's coming to you and is like, hey, I can help you out with that?
So the question is, how do you vet people to make sure they're not just making stuff up? Yeah, I mean, you got to ask for referrals. First of all, talk to them, like kind of feel them out, get a gut feeling, but ask for referrals. But even those referrals, you want to vet them. Like, does this seem like a legit person? Do they have the same last name as the person I'm talking to? Like, stuff like that. Because, you know what I mean, though? Because, like, you can easily have, like, a few, like, BS people that are giving you referrals. So they give you a list of 3, say, I'm good, give me 3 more. You know what I mean? So make it challenging, make it awkward. And if they're a legit person, they should be fine with going through that vetting process.
When you're working in a platform where an industry just became legal, and you want to convince the investor, look, don't be scared. It recently became legal. We know how to work around it. Like for an example, hemp, in 2018, it became legal throughout the country. So if you want to develop some form of platform around there, how can you convince a good strategy to convince the investor, look, don't be scared of legal issues. We'll be able to profit a lot off this product. What's a good way to storytell your way into that without looking to, oh my God, it might be illegal in some parts in the government. We don't want to mess with them.
Yeah, so that seems like a lot of headwind, in my opinion. You might be better off finding an investor who smokes weed and say, hey man, it's gonna be pretty cool. It's gonna be legal. But regardless of that, like the way you would do it is through storytelling and say like, hey, you know what? It just got deregulated in Denver. Now it's going to be deregulated in New Jersey. Here's the outcomes we're seeing from other brands, and we feel like we can repeat this here. And I know you're concerned about kind of backlash and everything. We're not seeing that either. We're monitoring this, and that would be the conversation I would have, almost like a case study. But I initially would go back to thinking, look, if you don't feel comfortable doing this, I don't want to force it on you. There's someone else I can be talking to, and I have a finite amount of energy. I don't want to waste that trying to convince you to do something you don't want to do. Let me just keep it moving and talk to somebody else. That would be my approach. Hey.
Hi. Yeah, just a question about that tool you were showing before. That was from Google, where you could see like the swell in activity as far as searching goes for certain kinds of terms.
Yep.
Yeah, so is there any way to get like a more in-depth view of, I guess, what kind of industries are searching these terms, or what kind of people are searching these terms, or is that something you have to kind of do yourself through like social listening and looking like at message boards, Reddit, and stuff like that?
So the question is, can you get more information about the people that are searching for these terms?
Yeah, like break down that at all, or no, or is that kind of impossible?
It would be challenging to do with this, but if you actually did a paid ad, you could see like demographics around it to an extent. You could do that. But initially, you wouldn't necessarily be able to get. You could do this. You could see their search data, and if you use a tool called Google Trends, which is a different tool, you can see related searches, like what else are they searching for, and you can also see geographically where you're seeing spikes for those searches, but you wouldn't get a lot of psychographics around that necessarily.
Oh, so it's mostly like volume and activity.
Volume activity, and then if you're using a different tool called SEMrush, you can see what blogs are ranking high for those terms, so you can get an idea of what they're reading to an extent, but that's more of an extrapolation than anything.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. I would say this, I mean, if you're talking about increasing your lifetime value, keep on providing value. And I think one issue that we have is sometimes once we convert someone, we're like, oh, we got them. And when you send them emails, they're just emails about buying more stuff instead of focusing on content marketing. So if you keep on talking about content that provides value in their day-to-day life as opposed to your product or service, keep that an afterthought, you'll be more successful. And if you want a ratio on that, I would say 80% of your content, whether it be on social, whether it be email, is all value, value, value. The other 20% is transactional. And that's how you can increase your lifetime value, by not forgetting that relationship you initially started with someone to get them to convert and taking them for granted. So hopefully that provides value to everybody.
All right. Thanks everybody for coming out tonight, and let's have one more hand for Terry.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Thank you.